Greetings. Welcome to my back porch. It's now the fifth Sunday of Lent. This is the weekend in which we traditionally cover the statues in the church from now until Easter. In our church, the statues are covered. So if you make a visit to the church in the next 2 weeks, it will be as we're accustomed to seeing it. In our world, not much is normal right now, so at least we can maintain some connection to our regular cycle of events in the church. As I start my reflection on the readings for this weekend, I would once again encourage you to pause this video and read the readings if you have not already done so. If you don't have a copy, you can find them at usccb.org. The Gospel this Sunday is the familiar story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. I want to reflect upon two people in the Gospel. Now, you might expect me to focus upon Lazarus and then maybe one of his sisters, but you would be wrong. I want to reflect upon Jesus himself and then briefly upon one other person in the Gospel. There are many places in the Gospels in which the humanity of Jesus is made abundantly clear for us. But often I think it can be hard for us to relate to him in his humanity. We tend to think of him as the second person of the Trinity, as God. And we're not wrong, but we can't forget that Jesus took on our human nature. Right now, in the midst of the ongoing uncertainty in our world, and the fact that many things are changing so rapidly, it might be hard for us to understand anyone's humanity beyond our own. I know that over the last couple of weeks, I've had a range of emotions. I've been overwhelmed at times trying to figure out what am I supposed to do and how am I supposed to continue existing. I've been frustrated by my own limitations and perhaps frustrated by the perceived faults or lack that I see in others. I'm sure that we can all relate to this. But it is reassuring to realize that we're all going through this together. It's in this context that I want to look at a couple of the responses that we see from Jesus in the Gospel. First, it appears as if Jesus is indifferent to the illness of Lazarus. After he's been informed of the illness, it says he remained on for 2 days in the place where he was. Then he tells the disciples, okay, now let's go back. And even as the disciples don't understand what's happening, Jesus still appears somewhat indifferent. He states rather bluntly, Lazarus has died, and I'm glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. Now, most likely, this made little to no sense to the disciples, but they went back with him anyways. Second, after his arrival, he's in exchange with Martha and then with Mary. When Mary arrives, she says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And John then tells us that Jesus became perturbed and deeply troubled. A phrase which is repeated again as he comes to the tomb. And people say, couldn't he have done something for him? Is this not the man who opened the eyes of the man born blind? Could he not have saved him as well? And it says, and he was perturbed again. I'm sure we've often been tempted or even asked Jesus similar questions. Could you not have prevented this pandemic or that accident or this particular illness, or the list could go on and on? It does make me wonder, how often is Jesus perturbed with me or with us in general? Finally, I want to look at that moment right before they take him to the tomb. It's a short sentence. It just says, and Jesus wept. The Jews that are present see this and say, see how he loved him. I think it's also something that we can easily relate to. All of these things show us the humanity of Jesus. He lived in a human body. He experienced human emotions. He truly lived in this world just as we do. However, he was not limited by this world or limited by his humanity as often we are. Jesus ultimately calls Lazarus forth from the tomb, saying to Martha, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Jesus is true God and true man. Right now, we need to understand how he has not only raised Lazarus from the dead, but how he's raised us up for something greater too. And I'm not just speaking of heaven. The Lord calls us forth from our hollow existence, from those tombs in which we sometimes crawl into. We are to live a higher calling, to reflect how how God's grace is present in our life, and how we're called to respond to that. The collect, or the opening prayer for this Sunday's Mass says, "By your help we beseech you, Lord our God. May we walk eagerly in that same charity with which, out of love for the world, your Son handed himself over to death." Jesus shows us how to live. We are to live in God's grace, and we are called to charity. That charity with which Jesus takes on our human nature and comes into our world to save us. It is charity that is going to help us in these trying times. It is charity that will allow us to get beyond the temptation to think solely of ourselves. It is charity that unites us to the very person of Jesus and ultimately to his saving action. Remember that second person I said I was going to consider? Well, I didn't forget. I want to look at Thomas. When Jesus tells them that he's going back to Judea, the disciples said, "The Jews were just trying to stone you, and you want to go back there?" They kindly stopped short of asking him if he's crazy. Some of us might not have been so kind, but ultimately he sticks to it. This is what I'm going to do. Thomas is the one who looks at the others and says, "Let us also go to die with him." This is the same Thomas we refer to as Doubting Thomas. The one who demands to put his hand into his side and his finger into the nail marks. He is the one who speaks up and is ready to unite himself completely to Jesus, even if it means his death, which ultimately it will. I hope that we too can unite ourselves so intimately to the Lord that we will follow him without reservation. So let us remember that it's okay for us to be human and to experience the range of emotions which we have. And then let us unite ourselves to the Lord, to his charity, to his grace, to his love, and to follow him as best we know how in these challenging times, that we too may believe and ultimately see the glory of God.